After 9/11, the world of aviation changed forever. Nowadays, things seem to be about change once again. In this era of globalization where everything is becoming increasingly connected, who hasn't been on a plane? The fact that flying is relatively common in most countries of the world these days is kind of an extraordinary feat. It's actually much more extraordinary than you could imagine. Don't believe us? Well, check out the following data. In the middle of the 20th century, in 1950, 31 million passengers traveled the world by air. Back then, flying was a luxury that only a few people could afford. By 1986, that number had increased to 960 million passengers. Pretty incredible, right? But what if I told you that last year, in 2018, a whopping 4.4 billion passengers were transported by air on 38 million flights? American Airlines alone, the largest airline in the world, transported almost 200 million people in its 6,500 daily flights in 2018. It's crazy. Aviation is so essential today that one couldn't imagine a world without it. Now, times change and aviation has also changed, and some of the questions we can consider are these. How are the airlines' business models changing? How will this sector evolve in the future? And how will that affect us? Well, listen up.
Different models for different times.
Traditionally, folks, the big airlines of the world concentrated their operations in one or very few airports. From these bases, they offered long-haul destinations. That way, passengers coming from domestic flights, called feeders, spent transit time in these airports before then traveling abroad, often wasting a lot of time at the airport. I'm sure you've experienced this annoyance. This model is known as hub and spoke, though we will call it the central hub model. This model, based on giant airports, has made sense for many years. Why? Well, because it facilitated long-haul routes which were operated with huge airplanes that needed to transport many passengers to be profitable. These were called dense routes. Airlines needed passengers to come from different origins and converge in the hub so that they could later put them all together on a single flight to take them to their final destination. It's pretty logical. And not only that, the sector was also affected by huge regulations. For example, in the United States, all routes between states were considered to be of public utility, and in most cases, the government itself was in charge of setting prices, programming frequencies, and even proposing or rejecting new routes. So every time an airline wanted to open a new route, it had to get the state's approval. Sometimes years would pass before they managed to approve new routes, and they often led to long legal battles. But folks, all this changed at once with the Airlines Deregulation Law, which was approved in 1978. This law introduced free competition and gave airlines a lot of freedom to operate based on their own market criteria. It was precisely this change, within a very short time, that led to a new business model that Southwest Airlines managed to exploit to the fullest. And that was the birth of the low-cost model. In contrast, air industry deregulation arrived in Europe much later. Competition between airlines, it wasn't allowed until 1993. Nonetheless, it saw such huge success that in just 4 years, by 1997, the entire process was completed. Nowadays, markets in the United States and Europe are quite different, perhaps due to their evolutions. In the United States, the variety of destinations, the numbers of users, and above all, the weight of their regional routes make it the largest air market on the planet. Low-cost companies such as Southwest or JetBlue offer a huge variety of point-to-point destinations. That is, the passenger travels from their origin to their destination without having to stop at an intermediate airport. And you know what? I can already tell you that this model is the future. In Europe, on the other hand, though they are moving ahead with huge strides, the sector is still less developed than in the United States, as many small airlines coexist. In addition, regional transport isn't so important, largely thanks to the excellent railway connections, the Achilles heel of the United States. And that's another topic we certainly have to talk about here on VisualPolitik someday, but not today. But folks, the big question is, where is the future of aviation going? Well, everything indicates that the market is inclined to offer more and more direct routes, that is, routes without stopping at major airports, and this explains news headlines like this.
A380, Airbus to stop making Super Jumbo as orders dry up.
You see, the fact is that thanks to the evolution of airplanes, which are much more efficient and cheaper than before, longer flights can be operated by smaller airplanes at a lower price. This is called a thin route, and it is shaping the future of aviation. We're talking about a huge paradigm shift here. Under this concept, the big airport hubs of the world could suffer a great deal. And that's not all. Let's consider the two largest aeronautical manufacturers in the world. Boeing and Airbus have taken the race to lead the new revolution in the sector very seriously. For example, a few years ago, the American Boeing released the Boeing 787, which promised an efficiency never seen before in aviation. That was until the Airbus A350 arrived, a groundbreaking aircraft combination of the best European technology, the lightest and most sustainable materials, and the most efficient engines on the market. In this battle to lead the new aviation revolution, competition is fierce. So fierce, in fact, that some companies are having to make great efforts to adapt to the new times.
Emirates and the end of the A380.
Who hasn't heard of Emirates and its gigantic A380 with luxury suites, showers, and onboard shops? We're talking about one of the most luxurious and reputable airlines in the world here. But the company, based in Dubai, is about to launch the biggest change in its history. See, Emirates is the most radical example of the overexploitation of the old traditional hub-centered model. Virtually all of its passengers pass through Dubai either as their final destination or to make a stopover on one of its 3,600 weekly flights to 138 destinations around the world. In addition, every one of its aircraft is huge. Its fleet was based solely on the Boeing 777 and 110 mammoth Airbus A380s, the largest passenger plane in the world. In fact, Emirates has the largest fleet of this model on the planet. And actually, without Emirates as a customer, the A380 program would simply be unsustainable.
Future of the Airbus A380 on the line as Emirates considers A350 switch. If a significant portion of the Emirates order is canceled, we believe the A380 program must end. Sandy Morris, analyst at Jefferies International.
This may be the clearest sign that the aviation sector is beginning to undergo a revolution. Think about it for a minute. The fact that Emirates itself, owned by the Emirate of Dubai, is thinking about no longer relying exclusively on Dubai as a hub is pretty significant. Equally significant is the decision to no longer continue to acquire the A380, the company's flagship airline.
Emirates rethinks its network for a world without the A380. We haven't been growing at the pace we used to because of geopolitical issues in the region and elsewhere. But that's given us time to take stock of what the network is going to look like in 5 to 10 years, and what fleet will fit in that network and the type of aircraft that it's going to be. Tim Clark, president of Emirates.
By the way, another question we could ask ourselves is, how would this paradigm shift affect Dubai, a city that, as you know, isn't enjoying the best of times right now? The thing is that airplanes like the Boeing 777X, the A330neo, and the A350 have become the new stars of the market. These three new models boast much more efficient performance, which allows them to operate on less dense routes with a greater profit margin. Thus, this makes big hubs obsolete. And of course, changing times brings the most opportunities for new competitors. In this game, there are companies doing things differently, and that is allowing them to have huge success. So listen up.
AirAsia, the success of the low-cost hybrid.
One of the greatest examples of recent success has its origins in none other than Malaysia. AirAsia is a low-cost company with more than 250 aircraft, and it transported almost 45 million passengers in 2018. Its hybrid strategy, a mix of both the central hub and point-to-point model, has made it the continent's largest low-cost airline in just over 20 years. Their secret? A model based on low-cost subsidiaries in which each subsidiary has several operations centers. These are sort of like micro-hubs or small domestic hubs. That way, AirAsia manages to take advantage of the high-density population and the huge number of tourist areas that exist in this part of the world. Now, with its affiliate, AirAsia X, its new big bet, it's trying to go a step further. You see, AirAsia X is its long-distance subsidiary. Its objective? To operate long-haul flights from these domestic hubs. Thanks to new aircraft such as the A330neo, this company will be able to offer attractive prices without needing a large passenger demand. In Europe, perhaps the closest thing to this model is Norwegian. Of course, on the old continent, we have our own way of doing things, and we have a world-renowned company that is often talked about that has forever transformed the European aviation market.
Ryanair, the democratization of air transport in Europe.
Can you imagine Europe without the possibility of escaping for a weekend to visit the city you dreamed of when you were a child? Well, today it seems hard to believe, but that was Europe not so long ago. The low-cost airline model that was born from the deregulation of the aviation market hasn't only changed the industry, but also the lives of all Europeans. We've already talked about this here previously on VisualPolitik. Ryanair began its journey in 1985 with 25 workers and a single 15-seat plane flying the route between Waterford, Southeast Ireland, and London Gatwick. Now the company has grown into a giant with more than 400 aircraft that fly to 225 destinations in 35 countries, and that is certainly no small achievement. Their success? Looking at Southwest and importing the low-cost model to Europe for the very first time, a model that is based on sacrificing services in exchange for paying less and flying from origin to destination in a single flight, that is, from point to point. Thanks to this, millions of people who previously couldn't travel within Europe now do so frequently on this or another of the many low-cost European companies that have sprung up in the last decade or so. This has definitely been a huge advantage in European integration. Even traditional companies have had to adapt to compete, creating reduced rates with fewer services. In Europe, this model has grown exponentially. In 2018, more than 500 million low-cost seats were offered, which is a historic record. And although many anticipated the end of traditional aviation, the truth is that the opposite has actually happened. There has been a democratization of the market because the prices of the big flag companies have dropped to be able to compete in a changing market, and now they are also accessible to many more people. But the question is, can all these changes completely eliminate the centralized large hub model? Well, that is going to be really complicated. Even though the traditional hub model is no longer as important as it used to be and is likely to decline, the big traditional companies have enormous structures that are linked to this model, which they won't be able to change easily. Right now, it seems unfeasible to think that the point-to-point model will impose itself on long-haul flight routes in the short and medium term. But of course, that doesn't mean that many airlines and many large hubs such as Dubai won't start having problems. In fact, there are many indications that they will. Here at VisualPolitik, we're going to be keeping an eye on all of these changes. So I really hope you enjoyed this video. Please do hit that like button if you did. Don't forget to subscribe for brand new videos. Also, please do check out our friends at the Reconsider Media podcast who provided the vocals in this episode that were not mine. And as always, I'll see you next time.